It's the OG Fact Checker, here to give you a juicy tidbit of history that's verified. Once I tell you the story of this man who served for 2 military branches, you'd be surprised that this person was a veteran because of the legal ruckus he caused and the ways in which he caused that ruckus. At first glance, this person may appear un-American, but when I used some critical thinking on his story, I found him to be a patriot. The definition of patriot, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is one who loves and supports their country. He spent lots of money and took a bullet for America as he fought for our First Amendment right to parody anyone, even a political or a religious figure, no matter how tacky, tasteless, obscene, or offensive it may be. I think if this man was alive, he'd approve of Afro-Man's recent victory in an Ohio court defending his right to parody the police officers who raided his home illegally on a bad search warrant. I'm sure he'd have a lot to say about Jimmy Kimmel's recent Melania joke that now has the FCC breathing down Disney's neck and the White House demanding Kimmel be fired. I won't say I'm a fan of my subject's occupation, which was publishing nudie pics in a magazine that was supposed to be a middle finger to Hugh Hefner's Playboy and Bob Guccione's Penthouse. Yeah, you heard right. This person was what was called back in the day a smut peddler or a pornographer, tomato, tomato. Hold on. I'm not throwing stones in my glass house. I'm only echoing how these magazines were viewed back then. Full disclosure, skin mags have been around long before Hefner, Guccione, and the subject of this episode, a U.S. Army and Navy veteran who created an empire from that unnecessary evil. Larry Flynt, creator and publisher of Hustler magazine. The main source I used for this episode is Flynt's autobiography, An Unseemly Man, co-written with Kenneth Ross, published in 1996. How many of you think that Flynt went to the U.S. Supreme Court to defend his right to publish his skin mags? Raise your hands. Okay. Well, you're all wrong. He went to the U.S. Supreme Court to appeal a previous court decision that found him guilty of inflicting emotional distress for a raunchy parody he published. He won that appeal under a unanimous decision, which is why the title of this episode is The Pornographer Who Fought for the First Amendment. Larry Claxton Flynt Jr. was born on November 1st, 1942, in Lakeville, Kentucky, a holler located in Magoffin County. He grew up in poverty, surrounded by alcoholism, illiteracy, and despair. He said his community had little contact with the outside world. Even the first sight of an airplane sent a woman to her knees to pray because she thought God had something to do with it. His holler consisted of 40 people from 5 families who farmed and raised livestock for self-sufficiency. His father, a World War II veteran, was an alcoholic and chronically unemployed. By the time his parents separated in 1952, he was an older brother to a sister who died from leukemia a year before his parents separated, and a brother, Jimmy. There's more I could say about his childhood, but even Flynt admits he's going by a sketchy memory and didn't keep a diary. Family stories are skimmed over or retold for shock value, I think. After the divorce, he, Jimmy, and his mother moved to Indiana, where his mother remarried. Flynt hated Indiana, so he talked his mother into letting him stay with an aunt in Kentucky, where he worked the farm in exchange for room and board. He was miserable in Kentucky, and after a failed attempt to leave for good, while he was a freshman in high school, he decided to join the U.S. Army. Flynt claimed he got the parent of a friend who was a school nurse to forge a fake birth certificate, and he forged a parental signature on the permission form when they refused to sign. And just like that, Flynt joined the U.S. Army at 15 years old, successfully completing boot camp and MOS training. According to him, he liked Army life and was proud to wear the uniform. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to worry about his next meal or being broke. He had a steady employment and housing. After 7 months, due to cutbacks, people who scored low on the entrance exam were discharged, and Flynt was one of them. He bounced between Kentucky and Ohio, working low-paying jobs until he decided to dust off his fake birth certificate and join the U.S. Navy, this time scoring better on the entrance exam. Flynt said he wanted to be an AJ squared away sailor, and he worked harder than others to prove he deserved to be there. Because he was on top of his game, he was getting noticed in a good way, but the attention made him nervous, and with good reason. The guilt from the huge lie the underage Larry Flynt told to get into the Navy began to weigh on him, so he went to his commanding officer to confess his true age. Flynt was on pins and needles, wondering if he was going to be kicked out. But because he really had been a squared-away sailor, he was allowed to stay. He hated his first duty station because he was assigned janitor duty, and he felt he was capable of more. He was bored, so he ran Bible scams with a shipmate until he decided that if he wanted to get ahead, he needed an education because by then he had set his sights on being a radar technician. Flynt was a very determined person, I will say that about him. With no high school diploma, he overloaded on correspondence courses related to radio wave transmission and took the test to get into radar class school. He passed it on the first try. After completing non-commissioned officers training and operating radar communication equipment on board ships, he was sent to Radar A School. A prerequisite for Radar A School was a high school diploma, but because Flynt had passed non-commissioned officers training, he got a waiver. Okay, let me explain something really quick to you so you understand the next part. I don't know if the Navy still does this, but before I graduated from A School training, I was given what was jokingly referred to as a dream sheet. I remember a map with a list of duty stations where I could go after I graduated, and the instructions were to pick 3. Nothing is guaranteed, but if you graduate at the top of your class, you had a good shot of getting one of the 3 that you chose. Flynt claimed that as he got closer to graduation, he was given a dream sheet. He wanted to be on a destroyer on the West Coast, so he filled out all 3 choices with the word destroyer and put West Coast at the bottom of the sheet. Well, he didn't get any of his choices. Instead, the Navy gave him orders to the East Coast to be on board the USS Enterprise, the Navy's first nuclear-powered carrier. Flynt didn't realize the significance of receiving orders to this ship. He didn't want it, and he complained all the way up to the Pentagon to be reassigned. The person who took his complaint basically said that being handpicked to serve on this ship was an honor most sailors would kill for, and he could forget about reassignment. I guess being assigned to the USS Enterprise, the U.S. Navy's first nuclear-powered carrier, was a good thing in the long run. According to Larry Flynt, who was 18 by then and a petty officer second class, the Enterprise was the crown jewel of the fleet, and the Combat Information Center contained the most sophisticated array of electronic instruments in the history of naval warfare. I had 95 men under my command, most of them older than me. I'm going to hit the pause button here because I think the co-author, Kenneth Ross, should have double-checked the dates Flynt gave about certain events versus when they occurred while he was stationed on the Enterprise. Flynt stated he reported to the Enterprise in October 1962, and a few weeks later, he got to shake hands with President John F. Kennedy, who visited the ship. He also stated he was responsible for tracking John Glenn's splashdown of Friendship 7 mission. The problem with all of that is John Glenn's flight occurred in February 1962, and Kennedy visited the Enterprise in April 1962. If Flynt had reported to the Enterprise in October of that year, there's no way he could have been a part of those things. So maybe he got his months mixed up and he reported in January. His story about how he got to shake Kennedy's hand doesn't appear too far-fetched, but the way Flynt describes his role in the John Glenn splashdown does come off as a bit dramatic, where he frames himself as the hero during an equipment malfunction. He admitted to gaps in memory, so we have that unreliable narrator thing going on. The only way for me to verify anything is to view his service records. I found a comprehensive list of veterans whose service records you can request under the Freedom of Information Act, and his name is listed twice with different service numbers, so his story of serving in both branches pans out. But I'm curious about his other claims. This is the second time I've been compelled to dig into a veteran's service record to clear the air. The first time was for B. Arthur in Episode 7, Beatrice the Marine. I'll submit an FOIA request and give an update on this episode when I digest his service records. Don't worry. If there's a story in Flynt's service record, this former yeoman with a clearance will find it. Regardless of these inconsistencies, a good thing did come out of his time on the Enterprise. Flynt earned his GED, passing the test on the first try after studying for months. He had finally shed the feeling of being a Kentucky hillbilly. As for Larry Flynt's love life as a soldier and sailor, well, he was married twice by the age of 19, and by his account, both women were real pieces of work. His first wife, who I think was 7 years older than him, married him for his Army paycheck. He claimed to have married his second wife, Peggy, while she was pregnant with another man's child. After Peggy gave birth, reality set in, and he realized his wife was a serial cheater. He said one time he nearly killed a man he found in his bedroom. The situation didn't get better when Flynt, disillusioned with the Navy, was discharged in July 1964, and the family, which now included a pregnant Peggy, the baby was his, moved back to Dayton, Ohio. Flynt got his old job back at a steel factory and settled down into domestic life, but he was miserable and missed the traveling he did in the Navy. He didn't want to return to the Navy, but he couldn't see himself working in a factory for 20 years. He needed a change. He wanted to be his own boss, and to do that, he needed money, so he worked a second job. Flynt also came to another realization. The reason why his wife couldn't be faithful was because of how his mother-in-law, Ernestine, had raised her, pimping her out to men since she was 10 years old, which is how he got suckered. Needless to say, he hated his mother-in-law. One night, Flynt had had enough, and after drinking one too many beers, he got up enough courage to cuss her out. A gun was involved. She fell down a flight of stairs. He sped off in a Studebaker and was later arrested. To avoid prison time, Flynt agreed to be committed to a psychiatric unit where he was subjected to electroshock therapy and experienced partial amnesia. He doesn't remember how long he stayed or when he was released. He had memory trouble for months afterwards. The birth of his first daughter, Tanya, in 1965, didn't save his marriage, and the two finally parted ways. Larry Flynt, now 22 years old and a single man again, moved forward with his plans to run a business. He had saved enough money from his two jobs to buy a bar in Dayton, Ohio in early 1965 called Hillbilly Haven that was strictly for blue-collar workers from Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia who passed on through. By focusing all his energy into building up Hillbilly Haven, he earned enough money to buy and renovate a second bar later that year he named Larry's Hangover Tavern. With the two bars earning money, Flynt bought a third he called The Factory, then a fourth called Whatever's Right, which he filled with lovely young ladies to serve as hostesses in what he envisioned as a posh cocktail lounge, an elegant little place with a good sound system and popular music. This one was a success as well. Around 1968, go-go clubs were popular in California, Arizona, and Texas, so he did some scouting in Phoenix, liked what he saw, and believed he could do the same thing in Dayton, which he did. He bought and renovated an old place and called his new go-go club the Hustler Club. In the club's first week, it cleared $5,000 in profits. In the summer of 1968, Flynt sold Hillbilly Haven and Larry's Hangover Tavern and decided to open a new exclusive, elegant club in the heart of Dayton called Talk of the Town. However, the Hustler Club was, to me, similar to the Playboy Club. There were pretty young, wholesome-looking women, lots of liquor, and, as Flynt put it, the hope of hanky-panky. To be clear, he wasn't pimping his hostesses. He wanted a classy place, and he expected classiness from his ladies. He taught them how to recognize the pimps from the spenders, how to shoo away the over-enthusiastic men, how to behave with customers and with coworkers. Hostesses couldn't accept tips, nor could they sit with other hostesses and discuss how much they earned. I know why they weren't allowed to talk about their pay. It was because of the way he paid them. He stated, "I paid them different amounts depending on their personality, appearance, adaptability, and professional ability, in that order." He created a list of club rules similar to the Navy Code of Conduct, and if they followed them, women could earn between $150 to $300 a week. With inflation, about $1,400 to $2,800 a week today. Not too shabby. Larry Flynt appeared to have the magic touch because his first Hustler Club was so successful, it allowed him to open more clubs between 1968 and 1971 in other Ohio cities like Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Toledo, and Akron. With success assured, Flynt was able to turn his attention back to the women, and according to him, he couldn't stop sampling the goods, if you catch my drift. He had access to chicks of all flavors, and he didn't discriminate. He liked brunettes as much as he liked blondes. He claimed that on one occasion, his secretary told him his tally of women for the week was 18. After his experience with his second wife, Peggy, Flynt vowed to never fully commit to a woman or to get suckered by one. But that didn't stop him from carrying on with 3 different women to have a child with each. 2 daughters, Lisa and Teresa, and a son, Larry Jr. He was briefly married to one of the 3 women. In case you lost count, that makes 3 marriages and 4 children. Flynt had 2 business ventures that were unsuccessful. One was a vending machine business, and the other was a newspaper, his first foray into the publishing business. The idea for a newspaper came from one of his visits to a go-go club in Phoenix that posted a newspaper out front called Bachelor's Beat. According to Flynt, the Beat was a local entertainment paper that carried nightclub and theater news, plus features on health, love, sex, marriage, and the idiosyncrasies of people. I liked its straightforward copy and unpretentious tone. He wanted to create something for the Dayton area. Luckily, the publisher was looking to franchise. Flynt never turned a profit, and between the vending machine loss and the newspaper, he was in debt and needed a way to pay off his creditors. So, Flynt came up with the idea to send a monthly newsletter to his club members as part of his promotion plan, and in March 1972, he mailed the first edition of Hustler newsletter to his subscribers. It was a black and white, single-fold, 4-page bulletin with short articles on some of the go-go dancers and a couple of feature stories. Feedback from customers was favorable, and they urged him to expand it, which he did. And by August 1973, the newsletter turned into a magazine with 32 pages. Larry Flynt's magazine was doing well from a customer's satisfaction standpoint, but from a cost standpoint, Flynt was hemorrhaging money. He found a way to continue publishing, but there were a lot of stops and starts, and he was getting deeper in debt. A chance meeting with a like-minded guy named Ron Fenton led to him dreaming up the concept of Hustler magazine after he researched the competition, specifically Playboy and Penthouse. His assessment of these magazines was, both publications made the implicit assumption that men are turned on by women with big breasts, great butts, nice legs, and perfect faces. But the men I knew, the working class guys, were turned on the most by female genitalia. To put it bluntly, if you got the models to spread their legs a little wider, you'd sell more magazines. So, Flynt reached for the brass ring, jumping at the chance to create a men's magazine for the working class Joe named Hustler. Now remember, Flynt was still in debt from the vending machine thing, and to make this magazine happen, he needed to cough up $500,000 to cover the first 6 issues. He's like, where am I going to get that cash from? I'll tell you how he did it. But even Flynt said he wouldn't recommend this to anyone because, as his attorney said to him much later, if the government had ever found out he did this, they would put him under the jail. Flynt claimed he got $350,000 by diverting employee withholding tax and sales taxes he was supposed to pay to the state, and got the remaining $150,000 by other means. Anyway, he got her done, and in July 1974, the first issue of Hustler was published. He admitted the issue was a disaster, and his co-publisher, Ron Fenton, exercised his option to bow out. Slugging it out alone, he went into crisis mode for the August issue. He hired students from Ohio State University as freelancers to write articles and hastily purchased stock photos. This issue, as well as the next one, were disasters, but by November of that year, the magazine began to take shape and started to show Flynt's personality, which included cartoons that ridiculed all races and religions, and models with exposed pubic hairs dyed red, white, and blue. Patriotic porn is what he called it. I saw a great tagline in his first letter from the publisher. Anybody can be a playboy and have a mansion, but it takes a man to be a hustler. Okay, what I'm going to tell you next, if indeed true, will prove without a doubt that Larry Flynt was a king, if not the king, of the hustle game. All right, so Flynt wanted to push the envelope with Hustler. Actually, he's desperate because sales aren't great and he's dumping cash flow from the clubs into the magazine. I can't tell if he put out issues for December or January, but he did say he intended to go out with a bang for the February 1975 issue because if he wasn't able to turn things around, game over. Flynt stated the November 1974 issue was the first issue to have what he called pink shots. I'm not sure if that was an industry term, and if I researched that further, I'm afraid of the search results. All you need to know is Hustler was showing muffin stuff the other magazines didn't, and for the February 1975 issue, To quote Two Live Crew, he was going to be as nasty as he wanted to be. In the February issue, not only was there going to be a whole lot of pink shots and offensive cartoons, he was also going to feed into men's fantasies of an older man with a very young woman for the center spread, pardon the pun. When the issue was sent to wholesalers, 40% of them, including all the ones in Canada, refused to put them on the newsstands, and he found out there was a chance his local wholesalers would be yanking them as well, which would ruin him. The only way to stop that disaster was to convince the head of the Association for Distributors, Roger Scherer, that sellers wouldn't be arrested by the Vice Squad. If he could get the head of Vice to tell Scherer there would be no arrest, the magazines can be sold. Flynt went to a newsstand and bought 3 hardcore skin mags, then marched to the police station to get an audience with the commander of the Vice Squad. He walked in, said, "Hey, I'm Larry Flynt," and the commander was like, "I know who you are and what you do." Flynt plows forward and says, "Hey, I'm putting out this magazine. I'd like you to take a look at it and tell me if you think my skin mag is obscene to the point that you'd arrest sellers." You have to give Larry Flynt his props. That was a hustler's move. Even I was surprised that the head of the Vice Squad agreed to critique Hustler, which he did with little comment. Then Flynt pulled out the hardcore skin mags he bought and said, "These mags are already being sold, and look at them. They're worse than mine." The commander pulled out his desk drawer where he had a bunch of skin mags similar to the ones Flynt brought. Apparently, the commander had been contemplating shutting down the sale of those magazines because he felt they might be too hardcore. Flynt is like, "See? Hustler, my magazine is tame compared to those." And the Vice Squad commander agreed. They got on the phone to Scherer, and bing, bang, boom, Hustler was on the stands. The issue nearly sold out, and that's because Canada still refused to sell it. The profits allowed him to pay back the payroll and sales taxes just in time for the Ohio taxman to collect what was due. And from that moment forward, the cash flow went from the magazine to the clubs and not the other way around. He continued to have flare-ups with the distributors, who threatened to remove Hustler. But as Flynt said, there's nothing that will change a person's moral outlook faster or more completely than money in large amounts. Hustler was doing well, but the issue that made Flynt a millionaire was his August 1975 issue that published nude photos of 40-something former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis on her private Greek island owned by her shipping magnate husband, Aristotle Onassis. Flynt paid a photographer $18,000 for those photos, an investment that gave a pretty impressive return. Not only did the issue sell out 1 million copies in days, practically every newspaper and news magazine across the country provided free advertising for Hustler by reporting Jackie O's elegant but naked body was on display and available for viewing for a mere $1.75 at your nearest newsstand. Believe it or not, Hustler was considered slightly pricey for its day, but Flynt argued that because advertisers were difficult to come by, the cost to produce the magazine had to be covered somehow. He also argued that if the product is good, people will pay for it. He's not wrong. Listen, I'm operating on a strict budget right now, but I do find the money for my La Roche-Posay face serum, so, there's that. Let's get back to Larry Flynt's love life for a second. And this part you won't like because there's a minor involved. In 1971, when Flynt was 29 years old, he met 17-year-old emancipated minor named Althea Leisure from Marietta, Ohio, whose birthday was 5 days after his. He was fascinated by the spunky brunette who had been hired by his brother Jimmy as a go-go dancer at one of his clubs. The woman who would become his fourth wife came from a troubled background. Orphaned at the age of 9 due to domestic violence and the victim of sexual assault, her childhood was a series of orphanages, juvenile detention, and relatives' homes where she was considered a handful. A good word to describe her would be feral. She didn't like anyone telling her what to do. Flynt recognized right away that she was underage, but she intrigued him. You can argue her young age was part of the attraction for him, but his description of her makes me think she was a 20 something in a teenage body. You could say she was street smart, self reliant, independent, and headstrong. Like she'd get the drop on you before you got the drop on her. I can tell Flynt really loved her because he dedicated his autobiography to her and had an entire chapter on their relationship. When he talked about his previous wives and girlfriends, you can tell he was indifferent about them. He either mentioned them in passing or talked about the hell they put him through. But not Althea. Honestly, I think it was love at first sight for him. Yeah, they hooked up on the day they first met when he busted her for lying about her age, but he actually got to know her, and I think he saw himself in her. Yes, Althea had a drug problem, but that didn't matter to him. She brought out his protective side from what I read. When she accidentally overdosed, he visited her in the hospital, and afterward, he hired her to oversee all 300 hostesses at his clubs. When one of his clubs was underperforming, he put her in charge, and she immediately turned the club around. I got the sense that Flynt had been the only person in her life to recognize her as an asset rather than a liability. He was a hard worker, and if you remember how he paid his hostesses, hard work was rewarded with good pay. By the time Hustler made him a millionaire in 1975, they were in a serious relationship, living and working together. She ran the clubs, he ran the magazine. According to Flynt, Althea was completely devoted to him and extremely loyal. He said she was damn near his soulmate. One night over dinner, he asked her to run the magazine. She said no. He said, "You'll start on Monday." That's how much he loved her, trusted her, and believed in her. Have you seen this movie? The People vs. Larry Flynt. It was directed by Milos Forman, and it starred Woody Harrelson as Flynt and Courtney Love as Althea. Flynt does a cameo as a judge. I think the screenplay did their relationship dirty and mischaracterized Althea when you read Flynt's autobiography. The movie underplayed Althea's role in Flynt's life. She was depicted as drugged-out arm candy who constantly liked to screw and spit out insane things instead of highlighting that she was his business partner and his equal. She's not shown running the magazine. Flynt's brother Jimmy and a bunch of other men are shown instead. I don't think there's one scene in this movie in which Althea is played sober. The first time she showed up in the movie, Flynt is getting her to drink moonshine after he busts her for lying about her age. Plus, I'm confused on how being a go-go dancer equates to being a stripper. Go-go dancers danced. If they stripped, they'd be called strippers. By 1976, Flynt's legal troubles began all over Ohio. In July of that year, he and Althea were indicted for pandering, obscenity, and organized crime, all for publishing Hustler magazine in Cincinnati. He, Althea, Jimmy, and Flynt's production manager had to turn themselves in, get processed, and then bond themselves out. He stated, "If we were convicted, the maximum penalty was 25 years in prison." If you were to ask Flynt why Hustler was targeted by multiple cities in Ohio, his response would be, "We ran cartoons that were offensive to all racial and ethnic groups. We spared no one. We were entirely bipartisan. We didn't care about your political affiliation. If you were an asshole, we said so. We ran one cartoon showing Henry Kissinger, Gerald Ford, and Nelson Rockefeller gang the Statue of Liberty. The vulgar nature of our cartoons and features was a matter of editorial policy. We would intentionally try to offend people. The Statue of Liberty cartoon made the mayor of Cleveland so angry that he held a press conference to condemn it and then instructed his district attorney to indict us for obscenity. It's safe to say that Larry Flynt's legal problems were problems of his own making. But if you haven't caught on by now, Flynt hated hypocrisy. There were skin mags on the market that catered to the most depraved, and they were overlooked by authorities. Yet Flynt's magazine was deemed obscene, and not because of how the models were posed. It was because of the cartoons. It was satire that made his magazine obscene, not the nudity. Flynt's major enemy was Charles H. Keating, a conservative Catholic lawyer and rabid anti-pornography crusader who funded an organization in Cincinnati called Citizens for Decency Through Law. One service he provided through his organization was to review, analyze, and summarize pornographic magazines and movies for overburdened prosecutors. I swear, I'm not misinterpreting anything. Keating would later be charged in both state and federal courts of fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy for a 1980s savings and loan scandal. That scandal negatively involved 5 U.S. senators, 2 of them being astronaut John Glenn and Vietnam veteran and POW John McCain. I said earlier that when you're good at something, people who ignored you start paying attention. This worked for him in the Navy, but as a successful but hated pornographer in Ohio, it brought him negative attention from Cincinnati prosecutor Simon Lice, the man charging him with pandering, obscenity, and organized crime. There was no love lost between these two men. Lice tried every which way to stick it to Flynt legally and illegally. Flynt decided to fight back by creating an organization called Ohioans for a Free Press. And through this organization, he planned a rally defending the First Amendment. Unfortunately, all the newspapers refused to run his ad because, well, number one, it came from Larry Flynt. And number two, well, his ad featured a photo of and a quote from Hitler. The reorganization of our press has truly been a success. Divergencies of opinion between members of the government are no longer an occasion for public exhibitions and are not the newspaper's business. We've eliminated that conception of political freedom, which holds that everybody has the right to say whatever comes into their head. If Larry Flynt's 1976 rally on a free press was held today, thousands would have showed up thanks to social media and not newspapers. But this was 1976, and word of mouth took effort and time. Newspaper advertisements were a quicker and efficient way to spread the word because, guess what? People bought and read newspapers back then. So, without the ability to advertise, the rally had a low turnout. Even with the low turnout, it was a circus because of the news outlets and reporters at the event. Fresh on everyone's mind was the 1973 court case Miller versus California and its related 1964 court case Memoirs versus Massachusetts. If you'd like to know more about how these cases plus a third one relate to George Carlin, watch episode 17, The Hippy Dippy Weatherman from Manhattan. I'm planning to redo that episode because the lighting is horrible, and I only created a few shorts from that episode. Before I zip through the trial, I should drop some happy news. A year before the 1977 trial, Flynt and Althea were driving somewhere one night, and suddenly Althea turned down the radio volume and asked Flynt to marry her. He's like, "What? Where's this coming from?" She's like, "I love you and I want a commitment." He protested because the C word terrified him, and then he said, "I'm going to continue to sleep with other women. Are you good with that?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm good with that." And he said, "Okay, I'll think about it." The next day, he said yes, and the couple were married in August 1976. In the movie, Flint's lawyer was a man named Alan Isaacman, played by Ed Norton, and Flint was tried alone. In reality, Alan Isaacman doesn't show up until much later. Flint's lawyer for this trial was Harold Fahringer from Buffalo, New York, an expert in defending pornographers. Jimmy and Althea were represented by Fahringer's partner, Paul Cambria, and his production manager was represented by a local lawyer. The judge, Judge Morrissey, was played by Flint in the movie. The important thing to note about this case is that the charges of pandering and obscenity were misdemeanors that carried small sentences. The organized crime charge carried up to 25 years. So Prosecutor Lice, Fahringer, and his law partner, Paul Cambria, battled it out in court. Although Fahringer and Cambria put up a great defense, it was no match for the hate the state of Ohio had for Larry Flynt. Notice I said the state of Ohio had no love for Larry Flynt. Althea, Flynt's brother Jimmy, and his production manager were acquitted. Flynt was found guilty of all charges, forced to pay an $11,000 fine, and was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison and no bond. He was taken into custody immediately. His attorney filed an appeal, and Flynt was bonded out 6 days later. Here's where Flynt's story gets weird. Released on bail, news about his appeal was blasted from coast to coast. While Flynt and Althea were in California, a representative of Ruth Carter Stapleton, President Jimmy Carter's sister, reached out to Flynt asking for a private phone call. Why? Because Stapleton felt she and Flynt had some things in common, and, like you, Ruth feels that our inability to deal with sexual frustration is rooted in our inability to deal with our religious convictions. During the private phone call Flynt agreed to, Stapleton invited Flynt and Althea to dinner at her home with her husband in North Carolina. For whatever reason, Flynt agreed to the dinner. Out of that dinner came a weird platonic relationship between Stapleton and Flynt that upset Althea so much, she told Stapleton she wanted her husband back. On a plane with Stapleton one day, he had a religious epiphany that was so intense it lasted for 24 hours. Flynt had found God. He started reading the Bible, increased employees' salaries, and decreed that an employee daycare center would be opened using empty space at headquarters. He even changed his diet. Althea was like, "What's the matter with you? What is it with you and this woman? And don't you dare talk to me about accepting God into my heart, not after what those nuns did to me in those orphanages." Flynt may have been a born-again Christian and a believer of God, but he believed in First Amendment rights even more. While he was out on bond for his Cincinnati appeal, he received another charge of obscenity in Lawrenceville, Georgia. This time he was defended by Fahringer's partner, Paul Cambria, and a local lawyer, Gene Reeves. Althea decided to stay behind, and Flynt refused Stapleton's company because he didn't want to jeopardize Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign. Considering what happened in Georgia, staying behind wasn't a bad idea. As Larry Flynt was leaving a luncheonette near the Lawrenceville, Georgia courthouse for his obscenity trial, he and one of his lawyers walking with him, Gene Reeves, were shot. Reeves was shot in the arm. Flynt was shot twice in the stomach. His abdominal artery was severed, and 6 feet of his intestines had to be removed. Because he had an empty stomach that day, the risk of infection was reduced, but doctors still worked to stop the internal bleeding. Althea flew in to be by her husband's side. Between numerous surgeries and blood transfusions, his spleen ruptured. He was flown to Atlanta, where doctors worked to find where the internal bleeding was coming from. A CAT scan finally revealed the source of the bleeding, and doctors were able to fix it, but a raging drug-resistant infection set in that required an experimental biotic to get rid of. Once he was out of the woods with that, the reality about his injuries hit him full force. His legs were paralyzed, but he could still have sex. That didn't matter to Flynt at all, because he was in agonizing pain. He stopped thinking about God, too. Flynt was tired of living in his mansion in Columbus, Ohio, where he was despised as a neighbor. And because he had already decided to transfer Hustler headquarters to California, he asked his doctors for the best hospital for his rehab, and they recommended Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood. He bought Sonny and Cher's old mansion, and that is how the Flynts wound up living in California. The year is 1979, and Flynt was tormented by searing pain that never let up, even with the strongest of pain meds. Flynt was managing okay, but Althea wasn't. Between her husband's operations and rehab, the court cases, and running the magazine, she was spiraling and turned to drugs to cope. Speaking of court cases, he had so many going on at the same time, I was confused. He had the court case appeal in Cincinnati, the cases in Cleveland, and I think Columbus, and the case in Georgia. He caught another case for being disrespectful during his Supreme Court hearing in Cincinnati, where he represented himself. Flynt was also sued by Bob Guccione for a cartoon in Hustler that suggested he was gay. And Flynt was sued by Guccione's girlfriend for a cartoon that implied she got an STD from Guccione. Larry Flynt caught another court case, and this one had to do with a secret video recording given to him anonymously of John DeLorean and a cocaine transaction that showed DeLorean was set up by the FBI. Somehow, a producer of 60 Minutes got word that Flynt had the tape and contacted him to see it. Once the producer verified its existence, 60 Minutes planned to use it for an upcoming broadcast. But the feds heard about the tape and said absolutely not, and took 60 Minutes and CBS to court to stop it. Then Flynt got another recording anonymously, this one just audio, in which DeLorean is begging to get out of the cocaine deal as his daughter's life is threatened. For this recording, Flynt held a news conference and played the dodgy-sounding audio tape, sharing the transcription with the press. According to Flynt, something happened at the press conference and the audio tape disappeared. While all this is going on, Judge Robert Takasugi, who was hearing the DeLorean case, thought Flynt was trying to sabotage the trial and issued a subpoena for Flynt to appear in court and snitch on who gave him the audio tape, the one he played at his press conference. Flynt, the ornery ginger that he is, said, "You're not the boss of me," and refused to show. Takasugi said, "Oh yeah? You're not going to show? Then I'll issue a warrant for your arrest." In November 1983, 15 federal marshals showed up at Flynt's Mediterranean-style mansion and arrested him and brought him before Judge Takasugi. Takasugi first asked Flynt for the audio tape, and Flynt told him it's gone, I don't have it. Then the judge asked him to snitch on the source, and Flynt rambled on without directly answering the question. Takasugi lost his patience and fined him $10,000 and told him to come back tomorrow with an answer. What I'm going to tell you next is the reason why no one would agree with me that Flynt was a patriot. The day after Larry Flynt's hearing with Judge Takasugi about the source of the audio tape about John DeLorean, Flynt had a photo shoot at his home with Annie Leibovitz for a Vanity Fair article written by Bob Policello. Leibovitz posed him naked with an American flag he said was draped over him. As they were doing the shoot, Flint's lawyer reminded him that he needed to be in front of Judge Takasugi in an hour. Irritated, angry, in pain, and filled to the teeth with ineffective painkillers, Flint thinks, how can I piss this judge off? I got it. I'll take the flag I've been posing with and show up to court with it as a diaper since they're treating me like a child. He showed up to court in that diaper, but the judge didn't address the diaper. He asked him some questions, told him not to leave the state, and to make himself available. That's it. However, the federal prosecutor had Flint arrested outside the courtroom for desecration of the flag. 2 weeks later, in great pain and seething with anger, he showed up to the courthouse on the desecration charge, pissed off a bunch of people, and suddenly the judge for that hearing orders a psych eval for Flint, but doesn't hit him with contempt. Another judge, Judge Manuel Real, overheard Flint's outbursts and ordered him to court for another hearing on why he shouldn't be charged with contempt. Flint showed up for that contempt hearing a month later, but on that day, he was 11 on the pain scale and got into a shouting match with the judge. Flint wasn't clear on what the judge had said to him, but it was enough to make him lose it and spit at the judge. That's when Judge Real had the bailiff gag Flint. The judge asked Flint a series of closed-ended questions, so Flint could only nod or shake his head. When the judge was done, he asked Flint if he was going to be civil. Flint nodded, and the gag was removed. You already know Flint was not civil. He cussed that judge up and down, and by the time Flint was wheeled out of the courtroom, the judge had sentenced him to 15 months at the Federal Prison Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, a federal prison psychiatric facility. If you think incarceration in a psychiatric facility slowed Flint down, think again. He ran his campaign for the presidency as a joke, started a news magazine titled Rebel, and in his words, I did my best to make life miserable for those who had confined me. I guess you can say Larry Flynt was anything but quiet during his incarceration in a federal psychiatric prison facility. He served his sentence at 2 prisons, and both wanted to get rid of him because of the trouble and attention he attracted and the hell he raised. He was released after nearly 6 months when his contempt case from Judge Real was overruled by the Ninth Circuit Court. Upon release, he packed up his presidential campaign and refocused his energies elsewhere. Flynt was never short on imagination when it came to tormenting the government. He sent a free subscription of Hustler to the House, the Senate, and the U.S. Supreme Court. And when conservatives in the House and the Senate tried to get the post office to ban the delivery, Flynt filed suit and blocked the ban in federal court. To twist the screws even more, he singled out North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms, who he called the Senate's biggest bigot. Flynt had his art department design a phone sex advertisement for Jesse. At the top of the ad, it said, Jesse Helms, phone sex, blacks preferred. We included his office telephone number and his number on the Senate floor. Then we added at the bottom, if no answer, call, and also printed his home number. Helms received so many calls that he had to disconnect his home phone. His legal guerrilla warfare didn't stop there, but this next stunt is what landed him in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He took aim at one of the most well-known religious televangelists at the time, Virginia native and founder of Liberty University, Jerry Falwell. While Flynt was in court over the Cincinnati thing, and right after he was sent to a federal psychiatric facility, Hustler published a parody of a liquor ad for the Italian company Campari that had been published in mainstream magazines. But this wasn't just any old parody. Let's see how I can talk about this ad without offending you. The original Campari ads had designed a series of high-class magazine layouts in which celebrities talked about the first time they had tasted the liqueur, with an obvious sexual double entendre. The claim was subtly made that Campari, like sex, got better after the first time. The Hustler parody featured Jerry Falwell in a mock interview in which Falwell talked about his first time, which was with his mother in an outhouse while drunk on Campari. Also in the ad, Falwell talked about the disappointment of future trysts with his mother because of and the flies. At the bottom of the ad was the disclaimer, ad parody, not to be taken seriously. When Falwell heard about the ad, he was so angry he was spitting nails. He decided to sue Flynt for $45 million for libel and emotional distress. On top of that, to raise money for his legal defense, he photocopied the ad and sent it to potential donors who collectively donated $700,000. Falwell hired Norman Ray Grootman, who had also been parodied by Hustler. Grootman was known in the profession as an unethical attorney who had Bob Guccione, the owner of Penthouse, as his client. The irony of Falwell hiring Grootman is that Falwell had sued Guccione for running an interview he gave to a freelance writer who turned around and sold it to Penthouse. Grootman had defended Guccione in the suit, which was thrown out. Flynt hired Alan Isaacman to defend him, who was portrayed by Ed Norton in the movie. Flynt thought Isaacman was perfect for the job because no one questioned his integrity and at first glance was the last person you'd expect to defend a pornographer. This lawsuit was filed while Flynt was in federal prison high on meds, suffering from chronic pain and angrier than a house rat because of his imprisonment. He thought everyone was out to get him except Althea. Grootman was known for his cold-bloodedness. He deposed Flynt in prison when he was at his weakest, and it was a disaster from a legal standpoint. If I go into the legal details of how the Falwell suit went down, I might bore you. This lawyer filed this motion. That lawyer filed that motion. There was a judge, a jury, a paid witness, mockery, some laughs, blah, blah, blah. The outcome is that Flynt wasn't guilty of libel because no reasonable person would believe that Falwell had sex with his mother. But Flynt was found guilty of inflicting emotional distress and had to pay $100,000 in compensatory damages and another $100,000 in punitive damages. Now, initially, Flynt was like, hooray! The court didn't bankrupt me. But then he was like, that sucks because you guys ignored a previous Supreme Court case. Now I gotta appeal that verdict, which he did with the U.S. Court of Appeals 4th Circuit. So here comes Larry Flynt, and he's in court once again to appeal the Falwell decision. To the surprise of many, the panel of judges rejected Flynt's appeal. Their refusal to overturn the Falwell ruling implied that if you publish something about a person and that person claims they were emotionally hurt by it, you can be sued even if it was untrue or didn't invade their privacy. On everyone's mind was a 1964 court case, New York Times Company versus Sullivan. In that case, a Montgomery Police Commissioner, L.B. Sullivan, had sued the New York Times for a paid advertisement in the Times attacking Southern racism and police brutality. A jury in Alabama said Sullivan's feelings were hurt by the ad, so he was entitled to $500,000 in damages, even though the ad wasn't libelous. The Supreme Court, however, overturned that decision. The court ruled that citizens had the right to speak against the government and its officials without fear of prosecution for seditious libel, slander against the state. Mind you, newspapers and magazines thought they were safe because of the New York Times case. But if the Falwell verdict was left unchallenged, it could be the kiss of death to journalism and could render the First Amendment useless. Flynt was the only one rich enough and crazy enough to take this to the U.S. Supreme Court or SCOTUS. I learned a lot about the law from Flynt's autobiography. I wasn't going to explain how cases make it before SCOTUS, but I'm feeling a little like Schoolhouse Rock right now. There are thousands of cases that are submitted to SCOTUS yearly, but not all cases rise to the top to be heard. According to the United States Court's website, the Certiorari Act of 1925 gives the court the discretion to decide whether or not to do so. In a petition for a writ of certiorari, a party asks the court to review its case. The Supreme Court agrees to hear about 100 to 150 of the more than 7,000 cases that it is asked to review each year. Larry Flynt was in a very instructive mood in the chapter on his SCOTUS case. I learned that certiorari is a Latin term that means to be informed. According to Flynt, if the court grants a petition, it agrees to review the facts of a particular case, to inform itself. His attorneys worked hard for the money because on March 20th, 1987, SCOTUS agreed to review the Fourth Circuit's decision on Flynt's appeal on the Falwell case. The date for oral arguments was on December 2nd of that year. Because Flynt was willing to put his money where his mouth was and fight for what's right, he had lots of what he called new friends to back him up. He was no longer the crazy pornographer who wore the American flag as a diaper. When a case is in front of SCOTUS and you want to show your support for that case, you can file an amicus curiae brief. It's a Latin term that means friend of the court. According to Cornell Law School, generally it is referencing a person or group who is not a party to an action but has a strong interest in the matter. This person or group will petition the court for permission to submit a brief in the action intending to influence the court's decision. So when I talk about Flynt's new friends, his amici curiae included, and I'm just going to scroll them here for the sake of time. Flynt talked about Isaacman's performance in court, and it's pretty close to the court scene in the movie where Isaacman is being questioned by Justice Anthony Scalia, and he makes everyone laugh. Speaking of laughs, Flynt had a good one on February 24th, 1988, when Isaacman called to tell him that they won by a unanimous decision, 8-0. There's one more loose thread to tie up. If you're wondering what was going on with Althea while the endless court cases were happening, she wasn't working for Hustler anymore. All the drama with Flynt had pushed her into a tailspin, addicted to pills, cocaine, and heroin, while she made the rounds on the Hollywood club scene with a cast of losers and junkies. In 1983, the month Hustler ran the Falwell parody, Flynt noticed that Althea looked awful and urged her to go see a doctor. A few days later, the results from her tests revealed full-blown AIDS. According to Flynt, it wasn't from sharing needles because, as Althea once said, "I don't share needles. Maybe a junkie, but I'm a rich junkie. I can afford my own needles." And it wasn't from cheating with a man because, as Flynt claimed, Althea only slept with women. Yes, I know female-to-female transmission can happen, but it's rare according to disease experts. No, he and Althea suspected it was from a blood transfusion for her hysterectomy. This was the early 1980s, and AIDS wasn't fully understood, so blood bank donations were not screened for the virus. As a matter of fact, that's how tennis great Arthur Ashe passed away after a 1983 heart bypass surgery blood transfusion. In June 1987, 3 months after Flynt learned that SCOTUS would hear his case, Althea passed away, but not from AIDS. She drowned in the bathtub. She was buried in Flynt's family graveyard in Kentucky. Flynt had numerous surgeries to relieve the searing pain in his legs, and for the most part, they brought him some relief. The man who shot him was never found. The courts finally left him alone because, compared to what was on the market, Hustler was considered softcore porn. He remained an ornery ginger, inserting himself into politics. He offered $1 million for dirt on GOP congressional members during President Bill Clinton's impeachment trial, and in 2017 offered $10 million for dirt on Donald Trump that would lead to his impeachment. The Kentucky ginger who peddled obscene pictures passed away in February 2021. He was 78 years old. I love history. You came for the truth? Thank you for staying for the story.